Hey guys, welcome to Silicon Valley Girl. Today we are at Stanford, probably one of my favorite places in Silicon Valley. We're going to talk to a Stanford GSB professor, Ilya Strebulaev. We're going to talk to him about what's happening in the US. Is it that bad? Are we moving to a new world where dollar is no longer the reserve currency? As an immigrant, I came to the US thinking I want to live in the center of the world. And it feels like it here. But a lot of people started talking about even like leaving Silicon Valley, going to other destinations, going to other countries. Are we no longer in the center of the world? Let's find out. Let's talk to Ilya. Ilya, thank you so much. I am super excited. You're the first Stanford professor in my vlog.
That's an honor.
And I am excited to ask you all types of questions about what we can expect in our current economy, what's going on in the world. Can you talk about your background first?
Of course, absolutely. I always was interested in how people make decisions. That always fascinated me because as I was growing up, people around me were making a lot of decisions. And I thought how they choose A and not B, or how they choose B and not A. And so I decided to study this. So I studied mathematics, then economics, then finance. And finance really is about making decisions. So I did my PhD at the London Business School. And then I came to Stanford, where I've been a professor of finance at the Graduate School of Business for almost 20 years now. And all these 20 years, I've been studying how people make decisions, how investors make decisions, how entrepreneurs make decisions, how large corporations make decisions. And for the past 12 plus years, I've been concentrating on innovation, on startups, on venture capital, on Silicon Valley, how all these kind of players around, both here, but also large global companies, but also regulators when they think about innovation, how all this make decisions and what is the impact of all those decisions and how to make those decisions better.
So the first question right away, so what's going on in the economy now? We have high interest rates and, a typical CD at Chase would pay you like 5 to 6%, which has been a typical return for the stock market, for some funds who operate. I remember like even 2% being good for a startup fund. What's going to happen to the venture industry? Have you seen the outflow of the funds? Are people investing less?
Well, there's always a short term, a medium term, and a long term view.
Yeah.
Because venture capital is for patient people. So if you are in for a short term, venture capital right now is not in the best possible way. Why? When interest rates go up, that means that the cash flows which are long in the future are now worth much less. So that it's much better to get, $2 tomorrow than $100 10 years down the road.
Yeah.
But venture capital is all about future cash flows. Startups are all about promises of the bright future, however great those startups are right now. And so, therefore, the valuations right now are lower. It's inevitably, okay? So if you look at most venture capital-backed companies, which are still private, then I would expect for most of them, the valuations would be lower, just because interest rates are higher.
So it's not the best time to raise, right?
Oh.
Or for some stages.
So not the best time to have had invested in venture capital back in 2019, 2020.
Yeah.
Because what's happening is that if you're an investor and you invest when interest rates are very low, which means valuations are high, then you're very adversely affected when interest rates go up. But right now, potentially, is very good time to invest. And this is, I'm going back to my short-term, medium-term, long-term. From the long-term point of view, right now, the valuations are relatively low. Not as low as they were in, let's say, 2012, 2013. Definitely not as low as they were in 2001, 2002. But they're lower, and who knows, they might even go lower. The lower the valuations, that means that the larger the ownership you can get for each dollar you can put into startups.
So Ray Dalio, talked about, change of the world change, the US dollar would no longer be the world currency, and we see crypto rising, we see China and Brazil abandoning dollar to trade in yuan. Do you think it's really going to happen?
It might. The future is very uncertain.
But
it might.
I think Ray Dalio was so convincing and so persuading that I started fearing, like, I just moved to the US, got my passport, and I think this is the center of the world, and suddenly somebody tells you, maybe not in the next 20 years.
So I look from this from the long-term historical point of view. If you go back in time, there were so many very smart people who were convinced in something that was absolutely would be certain to happen. And then, like in startups, there's about 80% failure. So Ray Dalio might be convinced, and he might be right, ex post. But is it 100% probability? I don't think so.
Are you worried?
I'm worried. But I'm worried not because I think that it's definitely going to happen. I'm worried because if it is going to happen, it's going to be, I think, unfortunate. Because one of the reasons you moved to the US, I guess, is the same way I moved to the US.
Yeah.
It's because I love the atmosphere here when I moved about 20 years ago.
What about now?
Now it's a little bit different. I still love it, but I think it's a little bit different.
Would you still say it's the number one place to come if you want to do a startup?
I still think so. Especially if you would like your startup to grow. If you're just a young entrepreneur who would like to build a global startup, you can start almost anywhere these days, I think. But as your startup is really becoming a large company, then you might want to consider coming here.
People started talking about, Silicon Valley is dead, US taxes, etc. Let's go to South Korea, whatever. Have you noticed that? That there's like the power shifting to other locations?
I noticed that people talk about that. And everybody's asking me questions about that.
Yeah.
So, couple of thoughts. And let me step back for a second, because I can tell you what the outcome is, or at least what I believe is going to be. But I think there is very important to understand some fundamental reasons behind that. So here is the first fundamental reason, is that it became much simpler to start companies. Here's my own personal example. When I came to Stanford almost 20 years ago, and I started teaching, my first students, when they graduated, two of them decided to start a company. And in the kind of online secondary sales space, the nature of business is irrelevant. What is relevant is that to get going, they needed to raise like $3 to $5 million of venture capital. Why? Well, they need to buy an expensive Oracle system.
Oh.
They need to get about 5 to 10 software developers. Why? Well, because you couldn't outsource them at the time. There was no cloud. That was before iPhone, okay? And then they have, of course, had to rent the expensive place for them to sit somewhere. And then they had to hire people around them to support them, okay? And by the way, a year later, they spent this $5 million, and they had to raise more money. Now, fast track to today. So I am teaching venture capital class, and about half of the class are starting companies. And they're doing what my students did 20 years ago. They're doing now while they're at school, so part-time founders kind of, okay? Maybe they spend like $50,000, not $5 million.
Yeah,
and they achieve everything faster, and they achieve more. And they outsource. They don't really know what Oracle system is. They don't need to hire any personnel. And more or less everything is cheap. I'm exaggerating, but actually not by much. And importantly enough, it's happening not only in software, but even in hardware. And that's very recent development. That's even happening now in biotech, in robotics, okay? Because I see a lot of my students from the business school start cooperating with the, let's say, postgraduate students at the School of Engineering or the medical school, okay? And they can achieve this much faster. Now, what this means? This means is that in the past, you really had to be in the place where there was a lot of funding, where there were huge networks. And this is why there were very few ecosystems. And of course, Silicon Valley was by far the largest.
Yeah.
Nowadays, you can be almost anywhere, and you can start business there. And so I mentioned Utah. This is one of the reasons. 20 years ago, there was no kind of Utah venture capital ecosystem, so to say. Okay, and the same is happening around the world. This is also why all of us can become angels now. 20 years ago, well, you had to be either very, very rich, okay,
very connected,
or very, 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 very connected to become an angel. But nowadays, there are, just in Silicon Valley, there are tens and tens of thousands, if not more, of angel investors.
I was at this, like a conference 2 days ago, investing in humans. I don't know if you know, but I was the first creator to raise a venture round from Slow Ventures. And Sam mentioned that investing is mostly driven by FOMO, right? Because you don't want to, miss out on the next trend. How do you feel like this is affecting the whole market? Because we've seen crypto go wild, and people were investing millions in companies that, did an NFT that allows some kind of membership, and then they all went down. How healthy is the market in general? Because what I noticed when I was raising money, we were profitable, great market, great opportunity, but I can't do FOMO thing. I'm not like, oh, this guy wants to invest and this is your last.
And don't.
Like, I can't.
Yes, don't do FOMO.
But I see a lot of Americans who can do, and they raise millions.
So the market overall is driven by FOMO, and the innovation market is driven by FOMO. Why? Because I think you are really worried that, look, everybody around you is investing in crypto, or 12 years ago in solar energy, or 7 years ago in social network, etc., and you're not doing that. Something is wrong with you. Okay, if you're an investor, you have additional pressure. Maybe your investors will call you and say, well, everybody is investing in crypto, why are you not investing? But if you look at the most successful venture capital investors and at the most successful angel investors, they are not doing this. Now, they're also driven by FOMO, but they control it. By the way, I'm writing a book right now with my former student about the venture mindset. We're discussing FOMO quite a bit, about how successful venture capitalists control their FOMO. So let me give you an example of my very good friend, Alex Rumpel, who is a partner at Andreessen Horowitz, successful venture capital firm. And I love his quote, which is, "Conviction beats consensus." What this means is that if you look at really successful venture capital investors, they are contrarian by their nature. They, in fact, they're not afraid of failure. They are perfectly fine betting on something, and then, not just the startup failed, but maybe the entire industry failed or never materialized, okay? Or maybe it was too early. But they're betting on something that right now is not yet that very popular. And it might fail, or it might become extremely popular. So I think, in fact, while the entire market is inevitably driven by waves of fashion, and I don't think this will change, this is in our human nature. If you look, in fact, at the most successful investors, they are driven by contrarian bets. Or they're trying to predict what else is going to happen in the future. And the whole point is that to invest in something that nobody else right now is investing in. But again, if you're thinking about long term, then right now might be a good time to invest. Maybe not in crypto, but in some areas.
AI is super hyped now.
Well, everybody talks about AI, and everything is AI and nothing is AI, kind of. So it's pretty vague. But this very office. Okay, so I meet here with, I devote 1 day a week to meet with all my current and former students, and and most of them come and talk to me about the startups, and I advise them on how to raise money, about their pitch decks, connect them with investors and so on, or they raise their funds, their venture capital funds. And the truth is that in the past 2 years, Marina, I've never seen so many crazy ideas. In the past, if you had a crazy idea as an entrepreneur, you had to find somebody else who was as crazy as you are and had $1 million. Now, let's say you have a crazy idea. Well, you need only to raise maybe 50,000 or 100,000. It's much easier to find crazy people with 50,000.
Yeah, and also
around.
you don't even need a lawyer. You go through Clerky and.
So you don't need a lot of support.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, but this is only at the initial stage, and I think this is what many people are missing in this discussion. So when we look at all those ecosystems from South Korea and India to some European places such as London and Berlin, to a lot of places in South America, there are a lot of emerging angel-based ecosystems or early seed investor ecosystems. And as a result of that, there is, I think, an amazing proliferation of early stage startups, which is fantastic. And by the way, if you look at the failure rate, which is kind of, how many startups fail per 100 started, failure rate is higher than it used to be. And why? Because it's easier to fail. Because it's cheaper to fail. Because it's faster to fail. This also means, by the way, that it's easier to try crazy ideas, which I think many people underappreciate. I work a lot with leaders of large global companies, chairmen, CEOs, owners, and I think overall there is underappreciation or underestimation of this effect. Because in the past, truly disruptive ideas had great difficulty going, simply because you need to find a lot of support, financial, legal, other resources that also believed in those disruptive ideas. And yes, when they're successful, we think, oh, it's obvious, but not when when they're starting. These days, it's much easier to start these disruptive ideas. Most of them will inevitably fail, but some will not, and they will disrupt all the existing industries in other locations. But these ecosystems, when I study them, most of them are at the early stage. Meaning that if you are a small startup, you can be in South Korea, you can be in India, you can be in Berlin, you can be in Caracas. But as you grow, especially if your market is not local, but if your market is global, you need more. Now you need still much more funding. You cannot scale a global disruptive idea, okay, with some exceptions in some specific industries. You still need connections. You still need expensive software. You still need high-quality software developers or engineers. And most importantly, you need funding. And so what I see more and more is that companies that start somewhere come here.
Series A, Series B, right?
Or even Series C. Come here because this is still where all this network is for now late stage or mid stage. And as a result of that, I think Silicon Valley is as strong, is just as before, just a strength, kind of dynamically different.
Interesting. What do you think about Dubai? Because I've heard a lot of people raised big money in Dubai because of the nature of the country.
Yes.
Zero taxes.
Absolutely. So Dubai, and I think overall the kind of the Middle East, is extremely quickly developing. So for example, I've been to Dubai recently, and I met with a lot of entrepreneurs there and venture investors. I've been to Saudi Arabia recently, to Riyadh, and met, there's a lot of interesting stuff happening there. But if you're a really large company, if your market is in the Middle East, you're staying there. But if you're really global, you still would like to come here.
So the US is still
I wouldn't say in the first place. I don't think it's about first or second place. It's about the critical mass of advice, network, capital.
By the way, I asked AI to prepare for this interview. You know what ChatGPT said? That you graduated from Chicago Booth, like the
Which is absolutely not correct.
Yeah, and like the boldness with which ChatGPT creates script and like throws in some random facts that are not true. Oh my God. But what do you think in general? How does it affect the startup scene?
Well, my comment about ChatGPT, which is interesting whether they're going to conquer this problem. If you think about us humans, we almost never absolutely certain in what we do. This is why in the English language we have might, may, can, would, right? So there's always some kind of possibility that we are wrong. And in fact, one of the biggest mistakes in business and investments is always think that you're right. So being super confident is not a great idea. ChatGPT is like super overconfident, okay? Which is whatever it says is always must be correct. And then you can flip it so that now it is completely confident that whatever it was saying a minute ago, now it's absolutely wrong.
Oh yeah, it changes things
Right.
like that.
And so that's, I think, I'm very curious about whether that will be conquered. So I think when ChatGPT will be able to say that, Ilya, I'm not really sure because there's some inconsistency where he graduated from, but maybe it's from Chicago Booth or maybe it's from LBS with certain probabilities, that would be an interesting development.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's true. What about startups? Like how it affects, because everyone is building on top of it. How do you feel it's influencing the ecosystem?
Right now, it is influencing ecosystem because obviously there are a lot of startups.
Yeah.
Like 10 years ago, everybody was trying to build
A chatbot.
Remember
the chatbot
like
thing?
Facebook apps, etc.
Yeah.
Right? And it might be a fad. I don't really think so. It might be a fad with ChatGPT. It's unlikely to be a fad with the kind of AI overall. If we take a step back, I think that fundamentally, it's changing the way the innovation works and the way competition in various industries is going to work.
How is it?
Because if you think about in the past, like if you look at almost any industry, there were many competitors, or in some large industries, there were a few large competitors and then a lot of small competitors. Okay? If you look at industries where AI is, whatever you understand by AI, okay, is dominating, the industry structure is different. So think about this. Whenever I meet with international executives, I'm doing a lot of kind of workshops for global leaders. I go to various countries and I will also ask them, so you have Uber? Most countries have Uber. So what is your second one? Typically they would know the second one and say, what is the third one? Nobody can tell me. So Uber, which is the second one in the United States? Lyft. Yeah. What is the third one? Exactly.
Alto. I've seen Alto.
But this is the new industry structure. As I say to my American students, international not understand, like for every Uber there's a Lyft, which is the new industry structure where AI is dominating factor. There will be one winner.
And no second ones?
There will be the second one. Again, for every Uber there's a Lyft. And then everything else will be like unimportant. So this will change the nature of competition.
But is it even like if we look at the apps that everybody uses, we all use pretty much the same apps, right? There's no
This is interesting because I actually disagree with that. So in fact, the research suggests that's not the case. But what research suggests is something else, which is the following. Whatever apps you use, your app usage follows the power law. What this means? It means that whatever the most popular app that you personally, Marina, use it more than all the other apps combined. I might be using a different app than you, but whatever app I'm using most frequently, I'm using more frequently than any other apps combined. It's like there's Uber, there's a Lyft, there's one app, there's the second app, and then it doesn't matter. It changes the industry structure. It also changes the nature of competition. On the one hand, if you're a startup founder, either here or international, on the one hand, it actually will be more difficult. Because why this new industry structure? Because it requires huge fixed cost. that startups just cannot match.
Yeah, because you have to sustain
Right,
them.
right.
Yeah.
So, like, if you need to have millions of computers in the cloud,
Yeah.
like you can't match that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, what it leads to a much higher rate of disruption. So that, in fact, I believe what's happening with the AI revolution is that there will be a much frequent change of either leaders, because there will be a new business model, new technology that will change the business model.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, I typically think from the business model point of view, not from the technological point of view,
Mm-hmm.
okay? Or definitely not from the cost point of view. Because the disruption in the industry happens when the business model changes, which is the way companies make money, the way there's a relationship between the companies and the consumers, whether it's B2B, B2C, doesn't matter, arranged, and also the new types of consumers. And I think that we'll observe much more frequently. And this is why I, in fact, think that right now is a pretty good time to start a company in something disruptive. If you're trying to go head to head with the winners, with the current winners, I don't think that there's a high chance you will succeed. But if you are in the new disruptive space, well, you're also betting on this space being successful. But I think in the next 5 to 10 years, there will be more disruptive spaces, more disruptive industries, or more disruption in traditional industries that we've ever seen before, ever, in the past, like 30,000 years. So
That is exciting.
I'm both excited, but also concerned. Like when I worked with many large companies, I think many of them are not prepared for the onslaught that is going to come. They're not designed. They're not set. Their decision-making processes are just not set up for this.
But they still can acquire, right, the companies, and this is what we wanted to talk about.
They can. Most acquisitions, in fact, fail. There are many reasons for that, from financial to cultural, but most acquisitions fail. And also, yes, you can acquire maybe 95% of startups, but maybe the 5% that you will not acquire will be the most damaging, will be the most
Google
exciting, but will be the most damaging to the well, I wouldn't say Google was damaging to Yahoo. Yahoo both startups. So in fact, it was. It actually was.
Buy them.
Well, Yahoo. Well, because Yahoo was ahead, yes. But Yahoo was at the time also like a startup, kind of. But think about what Google did to many industries.
Another question that I had about exits for startups these days, because IPOs...
There are almost none, unless you fail.
Exactly right. How many IPOs compared to 2020 do we have these days?
Yeah, well, I actually just looked yesterday, so with my team. So in 2021, and I will talk about our unicorns in the United States, we had 78, I believe, 78 IPOs of unicorns.
Do you know 2020 number? Because I think this is when Airbnb IPO, right?
Yeah, this is 2020 is a very unusual year because of COVID closures.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult to compare the entire year.
Okay.
But 21 was already kind of normal year in terms of comparison. So it was 78. In 2022, it was like less than half a dozen.
Seriously, 6 startups IPO'd?
Even maybe less. So.
Wow.
And in 2023, of course, so far we don't have many, right? And that's what I mentioned, is that if you happen to invest, especially in late stage in 2019, 20, 21, you might be sitting on large paper losses. Yeah. But you know what? If you look at the IPO waves in the past, you'll see that it's not the first time, and I'm sure it's not the last time. The IPO market has this tendency to freeze very quickly and then unfreeze. When it's going to happen exactly, I cannot tell you whether it's going to be 2024, 2025, but at some point it will. Interest rates might go down, or maybe even more importantly, we're right now not just in the high interest rate environment, but we're also in the environment where we moved from low interest rate to high interest rate. We're in the environment where there's a lot of uncertainty. There's economic uncertainty, political uncertainty, geopolitical uncertainty. We might go into recession right now. And this all, of course, weighs negatively on the IPO market. So I don't expect many IPOs this year.
How many have there been? Do you have data this year?
I did not look yet at this year, but I don't believe there were many.
Probably like one or two, right?
Venture capital-backed startups. I'm very optimistic about the long-term future.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are about to invest money right now in startups in a smart way, or if you are, just let's say young entrepreneur anywhere, or if you're a corporate innovation decision maker, right now is a good time.
Any stage, right?
To start something new, especially at the early stage. But as long as you have patience, because it will take you at least 5 years.
I also wanted to ask you a question about investing in general, because you invest in startups, but if we look at your portfolio, like in general, can you share what, I know treasuries is a big thing now, obviously, but also how much are you diversified in terms of international markets? Can you just talk about that?
Well, I do invest in startups of my former students, and also in the venture capital and private equity funds of my former students. So it's kind of a separate.
I like that. You have a very clear strategy.
That is a separate part of my portfolio. And notice I mentioned former students. Stanford doesn't allow, I think quite rightly so, to invest in the current students. But
because that creates.
So when I start my class in the fall, I always joke is that now you have the real reason to graduate.
Because I can invest.
Because once you graduate, I can invest. Yeah. In terms of the investment strategy, I pursue long-term vision. I do invest a lot in international markets.
Mm-hmm. Do you invest yourself, or do you have a?
I invest myself, but I pursue the long-term strategy. So I'm not a day trader, or not even a week trader. I think about the long term. Now, I think the macroeconomic, for example, the interest rate environment is important. So, as an example, maybe investing in treasuries right now is not the best.
You think so? Even 3 months treasuries?
Is not the best strategy. Well, 3 month strategy is not an investment from my point of view.
Well, yeah,
this is just
it's a long-term investment.
the place to park cash.
Yeah.
That's a little bit different. But the question that you're asking about, the long term is the ratio of fixed income to stock market. And again, forgetting about all this alternative investment.
Yeah.
I was always been believer in the equity, in the risk investment, especially when we're still very young. And in terms of international, I think that the share of international exposure is good, and I've been increasing it in the past 20 years.
Can you share the
in my personal portfolio. So, and again, in the stock market, I actually don't have any international exposure on international fixed income, but it's about 50 to 60%.
International?
International.
Oh wow, so you're mostly international. Interesting.
Well, most of my startup investments are local, even though I do invest now in my former students who start companies anywhere around the world, from South America to Africa.
Have you had
Asia.
exits already with your startup investing?
Yes, of course. So even though the failure rate is pretty high.
What's your top? Do you have any famous founders that we might know?
So, I have a lot of famous founders, but most of the companies that I invested in have not yet exited, for obvious reasons, because I started investing about 6, 7, 8 years ago.
What is your favorite investment? Do you have any?
I would not say.
Okay.
No.
Okay, got it. What is your big goal as a professional?
My big goal as a professional?
Yeah, you got all of these amazing awards, got this amazing background, you're 20 years at Stanford. Do you have anything else you wanted to achieve?
Oh, I'm only starting.
You're only, okay, talk about that.
So first is I really care about my students. We have amazing students at Stanford. And I also realized recently that I care about the impact, so that as I've been teaching my venture capital class, I realized that there are many more people who really would like to understand how this works. And so I would love to increase this impact to everybody. And I think I'm only starting on this journey. So
you're writing a book, your own startup fund or something, I don't know, like an accelerator?
Yeah, I think I would love my impact to be on the hundreds of millions of people.
So it's media.
Who are potentially thinking about either investing in startups or starting company or innovating within their large companies. Or people who would like to change their ecosystem around. Maybe they're a local decision maker, like a regulator or a local leader. And I think that my goal is for everybody to understand how this ecosystem works, how to make decisions, how not to make decisions when it comes to innovation.
So what are the tools? The book? What else are you thinking?
So I started doing social media.
That's amazing. Like this is just amazing.
Well, you are my hero.
So happy that even Stanford professors, you're actively posting on LinkedIn, Twitter. Isn't that because I talked about this 7 years ago, everybody's going to have some presence on social media. This is amazing.
Well, you're absolutely right. So, and Marina, you're obviously you're my hero. I will follow in your steps.
Thank you.
But let me be very frank. Had you told me 10 years ago that I would be, doing social media, I would laugh at it. But I realized the power. And I realized the power of this is because hopefully, and you need to ask my former students, or current students, hopefully I had an impact on them. But that was an impact that was narrow in terms of...
How many students do you have a year?
I have about 200 students a year, okay? And they were amazing students. And I keep in touch with many of them, okay? And I now have about 2,000 students.
They're probably some of the most powerful people in the world, right? Because Stanford GSB.
Some of the most innovative, successful people in the world. But I would like to increase this, because I actually think that what I've been teaching and also the research that I've been doing is very practical. And so I would like this. And so now that I started doing this media, I'm fascinated by this, and I'm also fascinated by the very early feedback that people reaching out, whom I didn't know, who did not come from Stanford, who didn't come from the United States, who didn't come from the companies with which I've already been working, and saying how they appreciate this, or asking very specific, very tactical or strategic questions. So that's been really fascinating.
Yeah, you have some amazing research that one of my friends told me about that I actually used when I started angel investing. There is something about the probability of building $1 billion company if you had something in your background. Can you elaborate?
Absolutely. So we will look at all the founders of venture capital-backed companies, and we try to identify the probability of them building unicorns, very successful companies. And there are many factors. There's education, there's work experience, there's where you came from, but also there's whether you, for example, started another company in the past. As an example, if you started a company in the past that also raised the venture capital round, then there's a much higher chance of you becoming an entrepreneur. It kind of depends, but it's between 7 and 15%.
Even if that company failed?
Even if that company failed. In fact, and this is what I think many contrarian venture capitalists know, is that when the startup failed, the question you need to ask yourself as an investor, why did the startup fail? In fact, if the startup failed not because of the team, then in fact you should invest in the team again. Why? Because going through failure is amazing, an amazing opportunity to learn. Okay? And in fact, indeed, the probability of becoming more successful if you had a venture capital company, including if you had a failed startup in the past. And in fact, if you have a failed startup in the past, and raised money again, then the probability of success is going to be somewhat higher.
That is great. That gives me hope that someday, I haven't failed yet, but Thank you so much, Ilya. I think that was super useful for everyone who is thinking about Silicon Valley, thinking about starting a company, and also super inspiring. I think Stanford is just, the place to be if you're trying to build something or learn how to build something. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
It's so much fun.
Thank you, Maria.
Thank
It was a great pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.